In this segment, I will talk about the Community Mental Health and Inclusion Program, which is called SEHER. It is based on the idea that, it's drawn from a number of spiritual resources, which I dare say are connected with lived experiences of people. For example, there is the Ubuntu concept. In Buddhism, the concept of interconnectedness is very strong, so on and so forth. So for SEHER, we started out with this metaphor. It was kind of a guiding metaphor for us, that we create emotionally sustainable and inclusive communities. Human beings are a natural support and resource of love, hope, sharing, and other positive strengths with each other. I mean, this is the essence of our humanity, and this is our essential human nature. And with increasing modernization, all of that, blah, we have forgotten that that essential nature. So we think of emotions as a flow among people, like water or wind. It is a natural resource which can be harnessed, which can be conserved, which can be pooled, and which can be shared. It is an entrepreneurship metaphor. Along the years, we realized that care and support is, even though it's essential to human nature, it's not something that people recall or remember on daily basis. And such recall and remembrance on daily basis is really important for us to preserve our humanity and be of help to each other, to be of help to ourselves, all of that, to overcome all the harsh memories that we carry, that our bodies carry, all of that. And this sense of Ubuntu or interconnectedness is not just for us, our immediate family members, our dear friends, spouse, parent, grandparent, so on and so forth, but it is a more universal kind of feeling for all of humanity and for all of the planet, including all living and non-living things. So we started to see communities as a resource, as resources. As far as resources go, then it's like a community well. You can dip into it, you can share it, you can replenish it, you can preserve it, you can conserve it, and so on and so forth. And so psychosocial ecosystem, we started talking about creating psychosocial ecosystems. This is a kind of, I love this diagram that one of our trainers, Alexander Cote, made for us. And it shows you two possible worlds. One is a possible world, which is actually very real for a lot of persons with psychosocial disabilities. It is one where the person is isolated. They are brought within a healthcare system which increases the stigma, which cuts people off from their communities, de-skills them, and leaves them quite, in vegetative states and quite defenseless, and never owning any part of their lives. So on this side, you see the mental health system in its traditional forms. Then you see that these two are bridges, CRPD, which I talked about early on. And CRPD helps to convert this colonial way of looking at mental health into this inclusive way of looking at persons with psychosocial disabilities. Here too, you have mental health over here, but it's only one bubble among a variety of bubbles. So you have arts, culture, sports, political public life, education, family life, social protection, jobs, support services, having social networks, decent work, housing, participation in financial transactions, making decisions of one's own, and so on. And this bubble is endless. I think people can fill it out in the way that they would like to live their lives. And this is for us the way of decolonizing our discourse as it exists today. And I think all of us are trying to find ways to move from here, to move towards here. But there's something about this, and I call it, in fact, I call it the post-colonial trauma of policy making, that we don't seem to give up on this. We go this far and then we come back and get stuck over here. And for us in Bapu Trust, we've even stopped calling ourselves a mental health, program. We call ourselves the inclusive mental health, inclusion program. We are more and more working from within the perspective of disability inclusion. When you say, okay, in how many ways can you treat a person with a mental illness? It already goes into a kind of expert-driven system. When you talk about, okay, in how many ways can you make inclusion possible for a person with a disability? Many doors open, and therefore we try to, in the very speech about ourselves and about what we need, we try to speak from a disability inclusion perspective, and not from a mental illness perspective. I think this has opened up another alternative reality to us, another possible world to occupy, where we can just step out and enjoy freedoms, look for jobs, complete education, aspire for having partners, aspire for marriage, aspire for having our own bank account, stuff like that. So you live life as on equal basis with everybody else. So this has been a very important, what they call a paradigm shift for us. Another basic strategy for developing inclusive community mental health program is committing to keeping the voices of persons with disabilities at the very center of knowledge, practice, and program planning and decision making. We commit to zero coercion, that we will continuously ask the person whom we are supporting what they need and not assume what they need, and offer stuff which they definitely don't need, like, for example, involuntary treatment, involuntary medication, all of that. I think we don't hear enough about program designs in community mental health. It would be good to make this a whole research paradigm. What is a program design that would actually result in inclusion of persons with psychosocial disabilities? Article 19 of the CRPD, our programs, mostly Bapu Trust, TCI, wherever we are active, we tend to focus on Article 19, that is the right to living independently in communities and inclusion. From that point of view, from Article 19 point of view, I think today, for example, in India, we have a couple of laws which embody the right to living in the community. However, the design question is not asked. When you ask the design question, you also ask the tool question. What are the tools that are going to help us move from point A to point B? The old tools, will they serve us? I mean, if we're continuing to use the GHP, GHQ, the BPRS, all the diagnostics tools that we have been using, will they continue to be of use to us? I doubt it very much. I mean, we have to generate our own tools, and we have developed, things like body maps, circle of care tool, family assessment tool, nutrition assessment tool. We have the community inclusion tool, so on and so forth. And some of them have been validated, not all of them. But we had to generate our own kind of tools in order to make our practice real in the communities. I would definitely urge investment on questions about program design. When it comes to trauma-informed services, we definitely think that there are 4 broad elements which are generic to such programs. One is peer support, particularly group support. A system and allocation of staff time for dialogue and negotiation with families, communities, and neighborhoods. This is a bulk of our work. To have a crisis response and support team, not in the way that people usually deliver crisis support in traditional mental health care, ACT teams, outreach teams which enforce treatment, not like this. For us, crisis is defined as high restriction of participation, situations of violence in the community. So this is how we define crisis. It is a crisis of the ecosystem. It's not crisis in an individual. And so then the support measures would address the environment which creates this kind of crisis of violence, abuse, neglect, stoppage of food and fluids, driving somebody to suicide, pushing someone out of the house to be wandering on the streets. So there's something in the ecosystem which has several outcomes for different kinds of people within that system. One of them happens to be an individual who is wandering. So this is how we think about crisis, and crisis response is at different levels. One is at the different levels of creating support systems in the neighborhood, support systems within the family, negotiating with the family to ensure that such violence does not happen, ensuring basic needs, food, fluids, clothes, all of that, place to sleep, place to rest, freedom to move about as people like to walk away from such a traumatic environment, toxic environment. So the freedom to walk away and to be able to empathize with that response, and so on and so forth. So this is how we imagine crisis response and support to be like more wholesome and trauma informed. Linkages with various development schemes and programs, both government and non-government, community mobilization, and building back better. So we expect that when such a design is delivered, the outcome will be the inclusion of persons with psychosocial disabilities, and such people will be able to live independently, not all by themselves, but independently in an interconnected way, and be included in lives of communities, contributing as positive members. So yeah, just to summarize that, we're talking about multiplying community emotional resources through the development of psychosocial self-care, support and caregiving groups and networks, both formal and non-formal. The second major strategy for such a program would be partnerships for inclusion with the local government, non-state organized actors, informal community actors towards inclusion of persons with psychosocial disabilities. Here I want to mention that including religious leaders, the local imam, people like that, the local policemen, people have come in, stepped in to support the people who we are supporting through our programs, where there are crisis needs and it need to be met in a more collective community justice orientated way. The third strategy is, of course, the provision of specific trauma-informed mental health and well-being services to address a spectrum of needs. And we use psychosocial arts-based and community development modalities largely. We do offer comprehensive healthcare because in our communities, we are more likely to see vitamin deficiencies, malnutrition, anemia, all of that. And of course, a lot of infections. For example, TB is still a big thing in our communities. HIV is a big thing. We're likely to see some of these issues. And so we offer comprehensive health care. We do believe that it's the failure of the public health system which results in the so-called alarming rise of mental disorders. And if the public health system does its job, then the bulk of health issues will also settle, mental health issues. Then, of course, there are the continuous application of project management principles to research, monitor outcomes, and to advocate for policy change. So at the back end of the program, there is a huge machinery generating data, studying the data, and feeding back into the program. Healing and overcoming psychosocial trauma in low-income settings might require three kinds of preparation. One is the community preparation, and there is the programs preparation, and there is the systems preparation. In community preparation, there are a whole range of things to do. One is baseline research, intensive community engagement to understand the whole mental health spectrum in communities. What is the community like? Who are the people at risk? How do they express themselves? What does their body speak? What are their cognitive experiences, cultural experiences, and do they really ask for mental health services? What do they need? Exhaustive community communication strategies. I think for the Sehat program, about 40 to 50% of the work is communication strategies at multiple levels, at the level of, small household level units, like 6 to 7 households. Then there is the broader set of strategies of using marketplaces, school campuses, college campuses, Anganwadi system, all of that. That's the larger stakeholder group. And then there are much larger spaces that the communication strategies targets. For example, during festival times, we have masses of people. So there are like population strategies that are also used using street plays, theater work, all of that, slogan marches. So there's a wide range of exhaustive communication strategies. So we reach out to people at the population level on a variety of topics, including distress, trauma, wellness, and basically conveying the message that everyone is an agent in making up the psychosocial ecosystem. We all sometimes do need to ask for support, and we need to mobilize support for oneself. So it's not just one person who needs support, but as a community, as vulnerable groups, as people who are marginalized within the larger city space at large, all of us need support. And so let's just depend on each other. So there are exhaustive communication strategies with multiple stakeholders, including in hospital settings and college settings, so on and so forth. We do extensive trainings on self-care and other support mechanisms. And for example, giving an example, treating oneself as a very important guest. I think the team has about 100 self-care modalities, small techniques. Nothing compares with the 80,000 techniques of the Buddha, but we have a few. We have about 100. Many of them are based on meditation practices, visualizations, moving the body, the daily pursuit of happiness, calming by a variety of breath practices, mindfulness, all of that, and also many body practices to improve general health. For example, the importance of exercise, the importance of eating nourishing food, all of that. So, and it does have an impact. I mean, not only do we deliver a nutrition module, we also go and follow up on the nutrition module. Are people actually consuming what we are advising them to? Has their diet changed over the time that they engage with our program? So stuff like this. And so this is on a continuing basis. Preparing neighborhoods for support and care of vulnerable people. So sometimes families give up and then we mobilize neighbors, and it's called a neighborhood alert. Here, the exhaustive communication strategies steps in a big way. So wherever there is somebody who is neglected or who's in crisis in the way we define it, then there is this net created using communication, negotiation, sometimes confrontation with families, pushing the moral button. It's a very important strategy for our team. Like, you can't do this to another human being, and many times it works. So preparing neighborhoods, partnerships for inclusion in communities today. There are a wide number of altruists, self-appointed social workers, the local government officers, the Anganwadi. A variety of government services are available today in a way that they were not before. Then religious institutions, the school systems. So we mobilize everyone into the cause of inclusion. And for us, that's what inclusion is about. It's not something that one organization does by itself. So at any time, the Sehat program would have about 120 partnerships for inclusion. And so, so that is about preparing communities. Program preparation, despite the larger population-based strategies we adopt, the program itself is modular. There is a modular or matrix-like design, and it's called the 8-point framework of service delivery. In that, there are these elements. Self-care is at number one. Number two is nutrition, and number three is comprehensive. I don't think number three is comprehensive healthcare. It comes much later. Building close relationships within the social, strengthening the social unit, however people may want to see that. Social capital building, focusing on livelihoods, inclusion in development, addressing social justice issues, individual and group support. So this broadly, it's a matrix. So you have the mental health spectrum and you have a matrix of interventions. So this is matched against this, and then people go and deliver these. So who are the people who deliver these? We have a lot of non-formal support people. We hire them from the communities where we are working. And we have a few formal support people. They could be counselors, development practitioners, clinical psychologists, arts-based therapists, people. A lot of us are people with lived experience. So that's a lot of us too. And so, yeah, so at the moment, I think so we see about 500 people in a year across 5 centers. We also have many satellite programs. Mostly on awareness, on deinstitutionalization, things like that. So we do have some satellite programs, and the bulk of our staff or people from the communities. Sometimes, that creates dilemmas because, we know, as experts, as people with lived experience, this is what must happen. But there is community resistance to apply what we think we know. And so there is a lot of dialogue. And so I believe the system is still flexible for this double loop of communication, dialogue, and adjusting the program to, what the community actually needs. And so there is that. Yeah, these are the more monitoring kind of work that we do in the Bapu Trust. Taking these, for us, this is a very important pilot. It's reached a certain level of maturation and scaling. We're already in the process of training other organizations on this model of support. This is probably, as I mentioned in the beginning, is probably one of the largest peer support programs for inclusion of persons with mental health issues and psychosocial disabilities. And I do not want to give the impression that we are giving support, but for medical care, you go somewhere else. I think if this is available to people, a lot of mental health issues already subside. A lot of trauma issues already are addressed. People learn ways to care for themselves and for each other. And I think that's achieving a lot that needs to be done in any case. So I'd like to stop here. Thank you for the audience. And I would like to take questions. Thank you so much.